So what I'm going to talk about today, to a great extent, is the Power Platform that comes along with Office 365 or Microsoft 365 and some of the components that it consists of. Do you have a slide for that? Thank you. So the three primary components of the Power Platform in Office 365 are Power BI, Power Automate, and Power Apps. And these are things that are there if you have Office 365. Many of you who do probably are familiar with them already, but they're there for you to use. And what we found with a lot of our customers is they're already in the cloud with their email or Exchange, and these things sit there untapped. Or some rogue agents within the organization figure out that they're there and go do a lot of fun stuff with them. So I'll start talking a little bit about Power BI. It's primarily a cloud-based analytics service that has a very wide variety of connectors that allows you to connect to pretty much any data that you might have, both on-prem and in the cloud. And it gives you pretty powerful visualization of that data and the ability to share those visualizations out within your organization so that you can bring, that decision-making ability to bear within the organization. Power Automate is a tool that you can use to automate a lot of things, as it's kind of indicative in the name. But think about connecting different data systems together to enhance their functionality, or managing menial tasks and automating them, doing approvals and other types of workflows. So for those of you who are familiar with old school SharePoint and you've worked with workflow and things like that, Power Automate is the new tool for that. And it has a world of connectors that you can use to be able to do a variety of tasks. And then the one we're going to dive into a little bit deeper today is Power Apps. And one of the really nice things about Power Apps is that it gives virtually anyone in your organization the hands-on ability to create applications that ordinarily you would have had to pay a professional developer to do for you. So it, like Power Automate and Power BI, connects to a variety of data sources. And it's literally point and click, Excel-like formula work to build an application that's useful for frontline workers or for people in the back office. So that's what we're going to dive into a little bit today. And so to expand on the contrived scenario that Matt was talking about earlier, what I've put together is a data set that supports that service request scenario. So kind of what he was describing is a scenario where we have people in the back office who are maybe receiving calls about issues with their product from customers, and they're taking that information in, and then they need to get it out to folks in the field who are actually going to go on site with the customer, repair, or maybe do a migration from one product to another, and so on and so forth. So what I've put together, this is basic SharePoint modern site. It's a team site that I put this together with. And the stuff that I'm going to show you today is available to anyone in your organization using their base Office 365 license that you're paying probably $7 or $8 a month for. And so that's one of the great things about this, is they can be building something that's useful and powerful at such a cheap cost. And so in this particular case, I have a service request list that I've put together that has some data in it already that my folks in the back office have been supporting. And just to kind of show you an example of what it looks like to, in modern SharePoint without the Power Apps extension. I have basically a dummy list set up here with one item of data in it. And so if you're familiar with modern SharePoint, you're probably very familiar already with the modern info panel. So we can actually select the item we're looking at, and I can choose to look at all of the content or edit that content in this info panel here. And this is out of the box SharePoint. And this is all well and good. This is quite a bit better than the old classic experience of basically web forms. But this can actually be improved to be much more usable for someone at the back office level, simply by doing things like rearranging the content in a way that makes sense to them on the form, grouping certain fields together and things like that. And the way that you do that is simply through a new menu item that you should see on most of your lists and libraries under Power Apps, and you have the ability here to customize forms. And so what this basically does is it gives you the ability to customize that info panel or that form based on the data that you have in your SharePoint list. So in our particular case, I have already customized that form to some extent. And so I'm going to go to my live service request list, and we're going to go customize the form so you can kind of see what that experience looks like. And while we're waiting for that to load, we'll jump back over to our service request list. And so just so you can see what I've done to this form. So in the first one, we saw that info panel. In this case, the form has already been customized. And so if I choose one of my items, right, that info panel has been customized. In this particular case, I want it more readable for someone who's using a desktop, because that's what they're using, either a desktop or a laptop at the office. And I want to organize the content in a way that makes sense to them. So things like title, customer information at the top, the issue, attachments, other things at the bottom. So in this particular case, this is what the edit form looks like, right? I switch over to edit mode, and it's a much more usable experience than the info panel, and certainly much more usable than what you may be familiar with in old school SharePoint, which was either customization of the edit form.aspx using SharePoint Designer, so much fun, or a good old-fashioned info path form, right? So these are the things that are out there now that we're going to use to beat those old things to death. So what does it look like to customize this form? So I'll jump over to where that form is loaded up. So in this particular case, I've simply changed the layout of the form to be a certain width. I've specified that I want a 4-column layout, for example. And let's say in this case I see, oh, my address, city, state, and zip are not in the order that I want them to be in. So in this particular case, you can simply come over here and choose to edit the fields on the form. And if I want them in a different order, I can simply drag them to whatever order I want them to be in them. So if I want address, city, state, and then zip, I do that, and they automatically change on the form. I can then save it.
If you wanted to change from 4 columns to 3 columns, is that a quick thing, or do you drag it over?
So it can be a quick thing. So I've done some additional work here to make this layout just so. You can switch the form automatically to 3 columns, and what that will do is say, okay, we're moving everything to 3 columns, and then you get to reposition some fields. So it doesn't know what really your end result is, but it certainly is much easier than what it could be otherwise. So once I've made that change, the next thing I need to do is publish it to SharePoint. So I do that, and as soon as you've done that, that info panel basically gets taken over and you get that new info panel. So if we go back and take a look at what this looks like after we've updated it, we should see our address information in all the correct order. Not quite yet. Give it a couple refresh. Live demos, right? So let's see what the new form gives us. Here we go. So now I have address, city, state, and zip in the order that I want them to be in. So that was pretty simple to get something that's more usable than old school stuff or even just the info panel for somebody at the back office. So what does it look like to create something for my first line workers who aren't going to have a laptop? Maybe they have a tablet, maybe they're using a mobile device like their phone. So again, based off of that same SharePoint list, we have the ability to create an app. And what this does is creates essentially what is a Canvas app. So for those of you familiar with Power Apps, you've probably heard the concept of Canvas apps and model-driven apps. Model-driven apps are apps that can access the common data service, which is a whole other thing where you can build a lot of custom entities. It's outside of SharePoint. But Canvas apps are generally using SharePoint data and things like that, and they're much simpler to build. So in this particular case, I have the Canvas app already built, but it's as simple, again, as saying create an app. And we'll go find where it is. We'll edit it here. And so out of the box, when you create your first Canvas app and using this method, it'll be formatted for like a mobile device layout, which is how I chose to leave it. But you can change it. So if you're using tablet devices that are a little wider, or if you want it to be portrait or landscape, that's a pretty easy change to make. So the goal here, again, is, as soon as it loads, give our frontline workers access to that same data so that they can go out and make a repair and then maybe submit some information and send it back to the office for processing. And our contrived scenario is a scenario where a service request is made based on some issue that the customer had with our product. And again, the person in the field is going to go resolve that. So a couple things that I want to dive into here are things to watch out for, or what we would consider to be best practices when you're building one of these Canvas apps using a SharePoint list as your data source or some other data source. And a couple of those things, so the first best practice is about styling it. So right out of the box, it's very easy to style these things. You can, for example, apply a theme out of the box that is here, but you may apply a theme and you may say, that isn't exactly what I want. It doesn't have the look and feel I want. I want to add my logo. I want it to be our company colors, representing our brand, so on and so forth. And so there is another method that you can use to do this, and that is through what some people have called Power Apps style sheets. And I use double quotes because it's not truly a style sheet in the true sense of the word, but it gives you that same ability to manage the look and feel of your content. And the way that that works is at an app level, we create essentially a set of styles that represent the colors that we want to represent. And so this is what those look like. This is something that gets run on start of the application. So when it runs, it loads up these styles. And then the second piece of this is that in our within our form itself, on our form fields, or in, for example, our header bar or our labels, we're going to apply colors based on a formula rather than simply selecting a color. So in this particular case, I've chosen that I want the fill for this particular header to use our Bulbco styles, colors, header background, okay? And right now, at the moment, that background is set to this ugly gray. And I also have a header text that I have set on that control as well. So an easy way to swap these out, let's say I figure out what my brand colors need to be. We can simply come in here and find our brand colors that we love, swap them out, and once they're in place, anything where we've applied those styles, we can actually come in here and see that it's changed. And so this will be changed across all of our forms, wherever we've applied those styles. So that can be a quick way. So when you're setting up your Canvas app, be thinking about that. Build your first form, set up your styles on it, and then as you build additional forms like edit screens, new screens, things like that, copy the original form or set yourself up a style form to build off of. And then you'll have those styles and all of those things automatically built into your header, your buttons, and all of those things. And that's a kind of a quick way to have that style, so it's not just out of the box kind of a thing. Any questions about that? Make sense? The second thing that I wanted to bring to your attention is this whole idea of delegation. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with what that means or that term, but the important thing to note about Canvas apps and how they connect to the data on the back end is that there are certain functions that they are delegable and certain functions that are not delegable. And what that means is the logic that I'm doing in that function sent to the server to process, or am I processing it within my application? And so in this particular case, you'll notice that on this view of the list of items that I have basically 5 items listed here. I know I have more items than that in my list, right? And in this case, I know that this Holmgren item, for example, let's say that's one that I care about. If where'd I go? If we're looking in this list and we actually run this application and look for Holmgren, we get no results, right? And so the reason that is because in this case I've set this Canvas app to say, go get 5 results from the data source, right? And it's brought those 5 results in and it's applying that search to just those 5. So it doesn't exist. So there's a telltale thing here that we can look at. So if we take a look at this particular scenario, you see this little warning that I have, right? So this is identified that, hey, you're using a function that may or may not be delegable to the data source that you're using. I guess the other thing that I'll note is certain functions are delegable on certain data sources and not delegable on others. So that's an important thing to note. So SharePoint in this case, supports a filter function as a delegable function, but not a search function. So in this particular case, I'm actually using a search to apply to return my results in this case. So if we actually go take a look at where that is implemented, that's this method right here, or this sort and query. So in this particular case, I'm searching my service request source. And by the way, when you build this the first time, this stuff is like automatically just in there for you, so you can build on it or add to it. And so I'm saying go search for, look at the title, the issue, the customer name, those fields, and look for this text that the user entered. So in this case, this is giving you that warning. This may not be delegable. You might not get what you expect. So to resolve that, the easiest way is to instead use the filter function. In this case, I've got a similar method. This one simply uses filter instead of search, and it's looking in some of those same fields. And if we do that, you'll right away see that now all of a sudden I have more results, right? Because what happened is Power App said, oh, I'm going to send this job to the server. And so now SharePoint is actually saying, okay, give me that search term you're looking for. I'll do the search on my end and give you the results. So that can be a gotcha, right? If you have a lot of data or somebody searching for something and it's, for whatever reason out in a funky order, why can't I find it? This could be a reason why. So now in this case, when we actually run this app and search for Holmgren, we find what we're looking for, as an example. Any questions about that?
Do you notice any performance issues between using the SharePoint list as a data source versus like Excel spreadsheet?
Any performance issues?
For sure, using Excel is not at all as fast.
Yeah, so if you're, it wouldn't be as fast. If you're using Excel, I would ask like why, for example. There's obviously some people start with that data, and so then that's what they have, and so then they work with that. But as easy it is to build a list, you can actually generate a list from an Excel file now. There are some different things that you can do. So get it into a SharePoint list, right? The beautiful thing about something like this is, like, I have this app on my phone now, right? I can access it. So if I'm that guy in the field, I can access it there. I can upload photos of the damage or whatever that thing is, right? And the back office gets it. Beyond this, we can start doing things like connecting Power Automate to it to send people notifications. There's a new service request, right? This has been assigned to you. Go take a look at it. This one has been completed. What did we do, right? And then beyond that, if you also start thinking about on these SharePoint lists, tracking things like the request date, when did it get serviced, when did it get completed, and all of those types of things, you can then roll that data into Power BI and start measuring yourself against your SLAs, right? And so there's a lot of stuff that you can build with just out-of-the-box SharePoint and that base license level that, it's important to be aware of that stuff. It's very powerful.